So my next guest is David Price, a renowned hi-fi journalist for many years. He's a former editor of Hi-Fi World, and he's now editor-in-chief of StereoNet. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Simon.
So we've asked you today in your role as audio expert, to roll back the years and pick out from all of that expanse of time your top 5 turntables. And then we've also asked you to make a choice of an arm, a moving magnet, and a moving coil cartridge, just so we've got a full set. So I'm really interested to hear what you're going to pick. But I guess we should just point out that obviously everyone has their own view. I mean, top of anything, a top 5 or a top 10 in any category is always potentially divisive, because it's not only what people consider best, it's what they define as best actually meaning in some spaces. So clearly this will be very much your personal viewpoint, but obviously built on a massive database of listening tests that you've done over the years, which is great. So are you going to do these in reverse order, 5 to 1 or 1 to 5?
Yeah. I think reverse is good. I'm not going to do the Tony Blackburn, add straight in at number 5. I can do it in the kind of comedy Radio 1 voice if you want, but maybe let's not go there, because it might get too silly. So yeah, the number 5. Firstly, before I do this, I just want to qualify what you were saying. It's absolutely right. So for me, these aren't, in my view, the best ever turntables, bar nothing. They are my favorite. And they are my favorites because I think they were very important historically, in the great vinyl scheme of things, rather than necessarily being the absolute best ever now. I've been tempted to put some obvious ones in. I love the Riga Planer 3. That's a great budget turntable.
I have one of those.
Yep, me too, absolutely. And also the Lin LP12, like you. I can see you've got one there. I love the Lin as well, and I spent my entire grant check in the sort of mid 80s on my first LP12, and lived on lentils, for an entire term. So I really suffered for that. But yeah, I mean, it's a very subjective thing. But I'm coming up with a list which are interesting, maybe quirky, and I just think they're important and interesting to talk about.
Right.
In at number 5 is the JBE Series 3. Now, this is a bit of a mystery turntable for many. It came out in 1978. The company was John Bryant Electronics, and that was formed in 1976. And it used to be called the slate deck, because it's basically a slab of Welsh slate used as a plinth, which is, as you can imagine, quite heavy. Yeah. With a strange kind of podule platter, I think it's 5 podules, or 6, and it's got a Technics Matsushita direct drive motor inside it. So it's effectively an SL1200 or something quite close to it, but with a Welsh slate plinth.
Right.
It's a very odd turntable. It sold for just a little bit less than the Lin Sondek in the late 70s. Mm-hmm. So it was a Lin rival, and I don't think it sounds as good as a Lin, but it certainly had a strong following, and it's a fascinating curio. It's an unusual deck, and it's got a really nice kind of strong, solid sound. It's musical, it's enjoyable, but more than anything, to me, it's sort of reminds us of that great period in turntables in the late 70s when vinyl was still the most important audiophile source. Yeah. And everybody was in the fight, to make a great turntable, including, of course, your sort of genetic relations mission. At that time, they were making turntables as well. Everyone was making turntables, and it was a hugely competitive time for vinyl and for vinyl hardware, as well as some great LPs coming out as well. So that's number 5.
Okay, excellent, great choice.
Great. Number 4 is the Technics SL1200 Mark II. And this came out in 1979, 1 year after the JBE.
Yeah.
And I'm deliberately using the Mark II. I'm not using the Mark I, which came out in 72. To me, the Mark II Technics is the sort of iconic DJ deck, the one that we all know today.
Yeah.
And it spent a long period in the hi-fi doldrums. It was very largely overlooked in the UK, but because of the, as it were, the strength and the sort of power of the dealership and distribution and the branding of the British decks, like the Riga.
Yeah, I remember it being looked on as very much a sort of second class, Japanese import, not as good as the British stuff.
Yeah.
And yet it seems to have outlived them all, really, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, it was when it stopped, the deck stopped production in 2010, and when I think when it stopped production in 2010, it was the longest running turntable ever, it's continually running in without stopping. So it's an amazing design, but yeah, it had a lot of snobbery about it, and to be fair, it wasn't really aimed directly at the kind of Riga market or the Lin market. But it had I think, a pretty poor tone arm fitted, but the motor unit was amazing. It was amazing. It still is amazing, even now. It has a quartz lock direct drive motor, a really high torque one, and it has vanishingly low speed drift, and an aluminium subchassis with a bulk mode compound base, which is really resistant to vibration. So you get a very solid sound, and certainly it's remarkable for its bass power. Its grip, bass grip and power is amazing. What I did, as many other people have done, is to take the standard tone arm off, and then get a mounting plate. I got one from Origin Live, and you can fit a Riga RB300 tone arm in it. So you can basically put a modern arm in a classic deck.
Yeah.
And it sounds brilliant with a modern arm. I've even had an SME5 in mine at one point, which is probably a bit of overkill, but it is so much better sounding than anyone expects when it's using a modern tone arm. So to me, that's a great iconic deck. It's an iconic DJ deck. All the civilians, the hi-fi civilians who don't know anything about hi-fi but are slightly interested, you draw them a picture of an SL1200, they'll go, "Oh, that's a turntable."
Exactly. Yeah, everyone knows it. So have you still got one of these now?
Yes, I have actually. Yeah, I have.
I was going to ask you at the beginning, how many turntables have you got in your house at the moment?
I've probably got about 40.
40.
Yeah.
And you've got all the ones on your top 5 list. Do you own them all?
No, all but one of them. Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of them are in storage, and I'm not sort of a strange person with no friends who's got a. I've got in my room here, I've got four turntables out and working, and I use them for reviewing or for trying different cartridges and tone arms and that kind of thing.
I trust you've got a phono signature, Cyrus phono signature, which obviously has 4 inputs on it.
Of course, you even need to say. So it goes without saying. But yeah, so I mean, I've also restored turntables. I do classic features on them, and it's hugely time consuming and a pain in the neck. But I just love turntables, so you've got the right person.
Fantastic.
For that particular job.
Fantastic. So yeah, we all recognise the Technics. So that's at number 4. And what's at number 3?
Okay, number 3 is the Michel Gyro deck. So that's 1981.
Yeah.
And it was, I think, a quite important turntable in the great scheme of things, because it was one of the first skeletal or exoskeletal turntables. So, before turntables were like your Lin, they had a plinth which basically covered the subchassis and the springs and all the gubbins inside. Whereas the gyro deck, of course, has an external subchassis, and you can see all the bits. It's like a kind of big Meccano kit on it. And it's, I think, along with the Oracle, which was also, you could say, the same type of exoskeletal design, it was one of the very first. So it's a very interesting design from that point. I knew John Michell when he was still alive. I knew him from the early 90s. And he told me that the gyrodeck design, the chassis of the gyrodeck, was inspired by 2001 A Space Odyssey's spaceship design.
Okay.
If you watch that movie, so John did a lot of the props for that movie and for various other Stanley Kubrick films, like Clockwork Orange and various others. I think he even did Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and things. So he was located in Boreham Wood, in near Elstree Studios. So he was a props maker and did all that sort of stuff. And so the gyrodeck has its central subchassis is inspired by that particular spaceship. It's got a very striking look. I'm looking over at mine now, which is on the other side of the room, covered in dust, just about to have an arm transplant. It has a really good sound, I think. It's been progressively updated over the years.
Yeah, we've got one of the later versions actually in the den room up at Cyrus. We use that as one of our reference turntables.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're really. I didn't realise that it was a 2001 Space Odyssey design there, and every time I walk in the room, I see it, and I hadn't made that connection.
Well, he liked his little things, but the sound of it to me, firstly, Michel turntables, the gyrodeck and the orb, which the orb comes from the gyro.
Yeah.
Wonderfully wide soundstage that I've really heard almost no turntable that soundstage is better. It's so expansive, and it's not maybe the deepest. The SME decks go much deeper, some of the higher end ones, but it's got a lovely big soundstage. It's got lovely tonality as well. It's got a really rich, not rich, but neutral and natural tone that sounds quite rich actually compared to an SL1200. Basically, you can put a bright arm and a bright cartridge on, it will sound bright. You can put a fat, rich sort of arm and cartridge, and it will sound fat and rich. So it's quite tonally neutral. It's for the price, it's still amazingly good value, I think. There are better decks. There are decks at the price that do things slightly better, but its overall mix of performance is really good. It's really special. So that's number 3.
Fantastic. So 2 to go. What have you got?
Right. Okay. This is the only turntable I don't own that I've been talking about so far.
Okay.
And I'm not rich enough, sadly. It's a Kenwood LO7D, and it's 1979. And again, this is what I was going back to saying about the glory days of analog being the late 70s. So the Japanese companies were really pushing very hard to try to establish a kind of technological superiority over the Western companies.
Yeah.
They were using all kinds of very interesting things. They had huge budgets back then because of the huge volume of turntables being sold. Then they had big budgets, they had big research teams and so on. And the LO7D is this amazing sort of odyssey of die-cast aluminium, mahogany, synthetic sort of concrete or resins type concrete. It's got a massive bronze platter, a stainless steel top disc, which is to break up the kind of resonant frequencies of the platter. It's got an extra mass ring that goes on and a massive record clamp. And it's got a switchable quartz lock direct drive servo that you can change the servo rate, basically. It's incredibly high tech for the day. And it comes with a fitted tone arm, which has a carbon fiber arm tube as well, which is really...
that's amazing, yeah.
Well, to be honest, Sony were doing it another 4 years earlier. So it's even more amazing that Sony were doing it. But it is basically this odyssey of wonderful, amazing, high-tech stuff. It was very expensive at the time. It was I think 3 or 4 times the price of a Lin LP12 when it was on sale. It wasn't reviewed very much in the UK press, basically because it was so expensive.
Yeah.
But I was fortunate to review one. I borrowed one, and I did a lot of comparisons with a number of different turntables, including some modern ones, and it's fantastic. So a real out sort of left of center design, and proof that at that time, that golden age of vinyl in the late 70s, there was a big enough world market to sustain some incredibly far out designs. So sound quality is really tight, powerful. It sounds very master tape like, and it's it's the trouble is it's such a dramatic thing to look at. You almost don't want to listen to it. Just
Do you know how many they actually made of those? I mean,
I don't know, but I would imagine it would be in the low thousands,
yeah,
maybe.
is it?
It wasn't a mainstream thing. There aren't many that come up in the UK. If you want to get one, it's Japan or it's the USA,
Right.
and you'll have to change the power supply or use a transformer because they have different
Yeah,
voltages.
110, yeah, yeah.
But I think sometimes they do pop up in Europe, sometimes in Germany. So it's once we're all out of the lockdown, you can get in the car and go over the Eurostar to grab one. But yeah, it's a very rare thing now.
Fantastic. Okay, so it's a real interesting range. No, I noticed that they're all from a similar era. So is your number one again of the same genre, or have you gone for something different?
Again, I've gone for the same era. So there's lots of great turntables I reviewed, modern turntables. I could have mentioned the Technics SP10R, which I did not so long ago, which is an incredible turntable, brand new. You can buy it, and it sounds fantastic. And there's all sorts, SMEs and so on, and all sorts. But for me, my most favorite turntable is the Marantz TT1000, and that came out in September 1979, I think. And again, this was one of the rivals to the Kenwood, which I've just mentioned.
Yeah.
And it was 4 times the price of a Lin LP12. I think it was 400,000 yen at that time. It was an absolutely spectacular deck. It has constrained layer damping, which effectively is not. They have that system in speakers where you've got basically a sandwich of materials with a sort of
Stop
damping.
resonance, yeah.
In this case, they used a 38. They used 15mm glass plates, which sat either side of an 8mm aluminium alloy interlayer. So you've got this incredible plinth, which is 38mm thick, weighs an absolute ton, and is basically aluminium alloy sandwiched between 2 glass sheets, and hugely substantial. You tap it, and the resonance just disappears into the center of the earth. It just goes. And 3.5 kilogram balanced aluminium platter. The early ones had a glass platter mat, which in the later ones they removed because it was a very fashionable thing to use glass platter mats back then, but I think we now realize it's probably not ideal. But I own one of these. I bought it from someone one of the very few people who had it, who had a connection with Marantz back in the day, and I got it restored, and ever since then I've used it with various arms. It's one of the best sounding turntables I've ever heard. The best time I ever heard it was when it had an Origin Live Enterprise arm with a Lyra Titan I think it was. This is probably about 10 years ago.
Right.
When using that particular combination of arm and cartridge with the deck, and it was just staggering. It's immense soundstage, 3-dimensional, vast left to right, incredibly strong bass, incredible dynamics, great speed, attack, but it's still smooth as well. If you take the glass platter off and put something else on, it's quite smooth. But yeah, it's just like an absolute battleship of a turntable, and they don't make them like that anymore, as they say. There's really not the market for these kind of decks anymore, because of there's such a kind of niche pursuit. But going back to what we were saying, in the late 70s, there was a market for it, a big worldwide market, and that's why we saw so many amazing decks
Yeah.
come out.
Yeah, those times may be coming around. I mean, I think that the vinyl market is still slowly increasing, and the market for turntables is still increasing.
Yep.
So it'd be really interesting to see how that market moves. So that very interesting top five, David. I noticed not a Lin or a Riga in sight, but I guess yeah, what you're saying is that these are point in time innovations, which
Yeah.
is why you've picked them. Which kind of yeah, fascinating, really interesting take.
No offense, yeah, no offense to Lin or Riga, you know, they're great decks and they're very interesting and they could easily have been in my top five, but I thought I'd do some interesting and different ones that maybe you know other people might not do simply because of the rarity.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I mean this is the wonderful thing about turntables. They've all got their own character. You know, like speakers, they're like loudspeakers. They've got their own distinct character, and people latch onto them and love them for certain reasons, I think. And you just can't, you know, put things into words. It's like trying to explain why you like your favorite pair of shoes, kind of thing. Really, it's
Yes, yeah, I understand. Okay, so just wrapping this up then, your favorite tone arm and cartridges. So what would you pick to go with your top turntable?
okay. Well, I'm going to be again controversial. I'm not going to go for the obvious choices. I'm going to go for in terms of the favorite tone arm. It's something that will probably have have a number of people falling off their bar stools, you know, with shock. So that this will people will be questioning my sanity, but I really like the SME Series 3. And yes, that's Series 3, not Series 5. I've got one. I've got it in my JBE, and it is by far not the best ever tone arm.
Okay.
It is one of my favorites, certainly, because it comes from a time, again, from 1978, when there was so much going on. There was a big argument going on, as I mentioned before, between direct drive and belt drive. So, you know, a lot of people with very strong opinions about belt drives sounding better than direct drives and vice versa. Another big debate they were having in 1979 was between basically high compliance and low compliance cartridges. So we had the king of the world in 1977-78 was a Shure V15 Mark IV,
Yeah.
which was a very high compliance moving magnet cartridge, and it needed a low mass and a tone arm of a low effective mass to work best. Now, at the same time, you were beginning to see a whole new generation of very low compliance moving coil cartridges coming along, which required very high effective mass tone arms to work properly. So the reason what I'm leading up to here is the SME3 came in right at the end of the ultra low mass, low effective mass kind of craze.
Yeah.
Designed really, it came out in 78, but it should have come out in 76 because it would have been more successful, because at that time everyone wanted a really low effective mass tone arm, and the SME5 I think was just 5 gram effective mass, which is vanishingly low. It had nitrogen hardened titanium tubing on its arm tube,
Yeah.
arm wand, which is SME said at the time was only twice the diameter of a human hair in terms of its thickness.
Okay.
Incredibly thin walls on the arm tube, which gave it a very, very low mass, but it was also very stiff and very rigid. So from a technological point of view, very interesting design. It won a Design Council Award, I think in 1979, which was a really big deal back then. It has to me, it has a very nice sound. It's not particularly accurate these days, but it's soft and smooth, and it has a very kind of what many people would associate with a kind of iconically vinyl sound. It's just very even, smooth, gentle, slightly rounded bass, slightly soft treble as well. But you give it a good moving magnet cartridge, and it absolutely sings. It's nice and fluid and fun to listen to. So yeah, a lot of people will be going, he's totally mad. He should have said SME 5.
Style over substance.
So, but I think that this was an interesting arm in its time, and you know, it was like a kind of space age tone arm. When it came out, it was like, wow, you know, we've never seen anything like it. So it was a really big deal back in the day.
And the cartridge that you're putting on it is what?
Right. Okay. In my fantasy late 70s uh, uh, turntable arm cartridge combination. It's a cartridge I have actually. It's the Technics EPC Mark 205. Sorry, EPC 205C Mark III.
Right.
Get the anorax.
Classic 1970s naming there.
Yes, it rolls off the tongue so easily. So again, 1979, and it was a moving magnet, obviously designed for exactly to fit hand in glove in a tone arm like the SME Series 3. And to me, it's a very niche cartridge. You know, you could have said at the time, you know, Goldring G900 IGC or Autophon VMS 30E or whatever. But this was a niche, strange Japanese thing. But it had a ruler flat frequency response from 20 hertz to 15 kilohertz. It was only minus 0.5 dB down during that range, and that was amazing for vinyl.
Yeah.
Its total frequency response, I think plus or minus 6 or 10 or whatever dB, it was 5 hertz to 80 kilohertz, and you know, which means it's effectively kind of you know, DVD audio
Yeah.
almost. So, but it had a boron cantilever with an incredibly low effective moving mass. It was very, very low. It was 1/6 of most cantilevers of that time. So basically the cartridge could track the groove with incredible speed and delicacy. And it has a very clean and accurate sound, very delicate. It sounds like a really good moving coil, actually, in many ways, despite tracking at 1.25 grams. It was £70 when it was new, which was about 3 times the price of the average kind of cartridge you buy for your, you know, entry-level Riga or something, maybe 4 times. So it wasn't crazily expensive, but definitely the geek's choice, I would say, that one.
Okay. And to round it off, then your favorite moving coil cartridge. So the one that you would swap out. I guess you'd have to swap your arm out as well, though, wouldn't you?
Would.
In this
Yeah.
case.
You wouldn't want to be putting the Supex SD900 Super in an SME3. I know people who've done it, but it's really, you know, it's trying to take a sort of Lotus Esprit off-road, basically. It's not really the right, you know, the right gig. So the Supex 900 Super, again, 1979, was to me, and I owned one, I still own it, I kind of still use it occasionally. It's not the absolute best moving coil cartridge I've ever heard. I'd give that accolade to the Lyra Etna SL, but the SD900 sounds nothing like anything I've ever heard before. It's a very low output, 0.02, I think, of a millivolt. No, 0.2 of a millivolt, and it is. It needs a proper, decent phono preamplifier. I'm sure I know someone who makes.
We're not bad at those.
So, but yeah, you need a modern, actually, a good modern sensitive solid state phono preamplifier for it, really, and it struggled at the time because the phono stages of the amps and preamps at that time were just a little bit noisy, you know, the moving coil ones. So that was always the downside, that it was a very low output design. It's also very low compliance, so it needs a really high effective mass arm. Linitok is a very good thing to put it in, or an ECOS or an SME5 maybe. But I always found the ECOS and ITOC absolutely just were magic with this particular cartridge. It's basically a baby koetsu. It's kind of koetsu that's shrunk in the wash from the glory days of koetsu.
Okay.
It has a lovely, rich, creamy sound. It's just so romantic. It's liquid sounding, and it just has a way of you put on a record, and on any other cartridge I've got, the cartridge just sort of tells you about the sound stage and the music and this and that. But it's almost like more like a drug trip with an SD 900. It's just everything is just sort of flowers and sunshine and beauty and happiness, and it's like you've taken a happy pill basically. It's not very accurate, but it really has a great character, and it's well worth picking one up and getting it retipped if you can.
Fantastic. So your recommendation as a drug alternative is that cartridge. So just to sum up, so your ideal combination then presumably is the Marantz TT1000 turntable with your SME Series 3 arm, and then presumably the Technics moving magnet cartridge on it.
It could be, yeah. It could be. It could one of them. One of my
one of your 40 that you have knocking around the house.
Yeah, I mean, I think the SME 3 is just not quite good enough to get the best out of the Marantz, but there's all sorts of things you could put in there, but it's the wonderful thing about vinyl is it's not just turntables. You have to have long pub debates over this one's better than that one. It's not just tone arms, it's not just cartridges, and you could talk for hours or days about cartridges. It's the combinations of the three, and we can all just disappear into a sort of alcoholic cloud of oblivion as we try to explain why this combination is better than that. So yeah, I mean that would be quite a memorable combination, certainly. But I've gone for products which have character. There are other turntables and arms and cartridges which have maybe more analytical, more matter-of-fact sound. But I kind of think if you're into classic vinyl and you're talking all-time vinyl rather than what's on the market now, if you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound. You might as well go for things with big characters, and even if they're a little bit coloured or a little bit flawed or a little bit soft in the bass or whatever. That's the fun of classic vinyl. You can get a system that sounds like what most people's idea of vinyl is.
I get it. Yeah.
That, so
brilliant.
Yeah.
David, it's been fascinating. Real trip down memory lane, most of it, which is great. And thank you very much for taking the time today to share your choices based on your huge amount of experience with us. Really appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Cheers.